reports, and in the fringes of the G20 meeting in London, the idea was that this agreement would be wound up. But it wasn't, and apparently Korea decided to reopen the negotiations. So that one is still on hold at the moment. We can come back and discuss again why Korea decided to do that, if indeed they did. EU-ASEAN, another region-to-region negotiation, is on hold at the moment because of the region-to-region or bilateral issue. The EU would like to see forward movement in the negotiations, therefore it's looking to start talking with individual countries. But ASEAN wants to negotiate as a region, at least initially. And at the moment, it's on hold because of that issue. And ASEAN has its own. I think they were supposed to be discussing this issue at the last ASEAN summit. EU-India is going to be a challenge, and that hasn't made very much progress so far. As, India has just been going through elections. It will be a fairly long haul. The Andean community in Central America, I think the second, third rounds of negotiations are taking place. EU-Canada, the scoping paper has been complete. The scoping exercise has been complete, and as I say, the intention is to launch formal negotiations on May the 6th. So let me move on to that topic in particular. Perhaps I should say a little bit about motivations for this, or rather the potential economic gains. I mean, there have been some estimates of the economic gains from the Canada-EU agreement, and clearly there are potential benefits on both sides from this. The benefits for the EU have been estimated at about 11 billion euros per annum from 2014. That's 0.08% of GDP, of European GDP. For Canada, about 8 billion euros from 2014. That's 0.77% of Canadian GDP. I mean, you have to take these figures with a bit of a pinch of salt because they're based on the normal assumptions, especially in terms of the benefits from services liberalisation. It's very tricky measuring that. A lot of the benefits from any agreement would come in the services sector, particularly for the EU. About 50% of the benefits are in the services sector for the EU, 25% in goods, and the rest from removal of non-tariff barriers in Canada. The estimates are that the trade would increase by about 23%. This is mostly trade in goods that's being measured here. And the EU gains from trade would be slightly more than Canadian gains from trade, because Canadian tariffs are a bit higher on average. Now, those are based on assumptions that the Doha round will be completed, and that a sort of middle range of tariff reductions will be achieved in the NAM negotiations. If the Doha round is not completed, then the gains may be greater. Certainly would be greater, maybe significantly greater. The business organizations, business lobbies on both sides of the Atlantic have lobbied quite hard for this. And if you look through the latest statement from the Canada-EU business dialogue, it's a virtual who's who of European industry. So companies have signed up to this process. So the motivations, the main motivations, I think, from a Canadian point of view, the Canadians among you who know better than me, of course, is trade diversification. a key issue. The EU is Canada's second largest trading partner. And so an increase in trade with the EU would be beneficial, especially as, relatively speaking, the EU has declined as a percentage, I think, of Canadian exports. Absolute terms, trade has grown, but the percentage share of exports going to the EU has declined. From an EU point of view, there are economic gains, there is a business case to be made, and perhaps there is a case that this would form a model, a model for future FTAs, because it would be the first FTA the EU has negotiated with another advanced industrialized country. All the other ones have been, well, you could say Korea is an advanced industrialized country, but that's the closest the EU has come to negotiating an FTA of that kind. So let me move on to look at the FTA, the Canada-EU FTA itself. I try not to get too technical here, but I think there's some people who might be interested in some of the technicalities of it. What I've done here is to try to go through the key areas that will be covered in the negotiation. Say here, the second column is what the EU has done with previous agreements, because, I mean, there's a scoping paper, but it's only a scoping paper, and I haven't seen the mandates, and even so, the mandates will be pretty vague, probably. So we don't really know for sure what the EU's interests are going to be, but you can get a sense of what the EU will be looking for by looking at what it's negotiated in previous agreements and what its position has been. So that's what I've done in this column here. And the third column is the kind of expectations from the Canada-EU agreement from the scoping paper. So first on tariffs. If you look at previous FTAs that the EU has negotiated, you get near to 100% coverage of tariffs. That means nearly the removal of all industrial tariffs, more or less. So you have some sensitive sectors, but most tariffs are phased out over the period of the implementation of the FTA. But that's not the case with agriculture, of course. Agriculture, there is far more excluded sectors from the preferential agreements. Now, in the case of EU-Canada, the scoping paper talks about ambitious tariff liberalisation, whatever that means, of course, but more than is required for Article 24 of the GATT. I won't go into the details, but Article 24 of the GATT means substantially all trade, which has been defined as being at least 90% of trade. 90% of tariff lines and trade, if you want to get into the details. And the scoping paper talks about no tariff line being excluded a priori, which is quite ambitious. In reality, if you look at the tariff structure, the EU has these tariffs still in textiles. When I say tariffs, I mean MFN tariffs now. It has tariffs in textiles, but so does Canada, actually. If you look at dairy products, for example, Canadian tariffs, average tariffs are quite high. There's a number of other sectors. So there is scope there, even within agriculture, for reciprocal tariff liberalisation to take place. So it may well be that because Canada has got something to offer, it's got its own agricultural tariffs, especially in certain sectors. The EU may be pushed a bit further than it has been in previous FTAs. On services, the EU policy has been to look for GATS plus liberalisation and to match what the US has got. And the